5, Cinco de Mayo, 2020, 6:02 p.m. This is the City of Woodland regular City Council meeting of May 5. And my name is Rich Landsberg. I'm the mayor of City of Woodland. I'd like to make clear for the record that this meeting, and it should be reflected in our minutes, that this regular City Council meeting of May 5, 2020 will be conducted pursuant to Governor Newsom's Executive Order 2920. This meeting will be held via teleconference, and council members will participate via teleconference. Their locations are not listed on the agenda and are not accessible to the public. Public is encouraged to listen to the City Council meeting live on Woodland TV Channel 20, and also by going into the City of Woodland website at www.cityofwoodland.org/meetings. If a member of the public wishes to make a comment during the general public comment period on a specific agenda item, there are two ways to do that. First, members of the public were invited to leave a message at area code 530-661-5900. All voicemail messages received by 6 p.m. tonight will be played during the City Council meeting and read into the record at the appropriate time. Any member of the public watching the live stream wishes to make a comment on an item as it is being heard may submit an email to the city clerk at councilmeetings@cityofwoodland.org prior to the public comment on that particular item. Email comments submitted to be read into the record shall be no longer than 3 minutes when read aloud. Please include the agenda item, the subject line. Madam Clerk, at this time, can we please conduct roll call?
Yes. Councilmember Barajas.
Here.
Councilmember Fernandez.
Present.
Mayor Landsberg.
Present.
Councilmember Rodriguez. She's not on yet. And Mayor Pro Tem Stallard.
Present.
Thank you.
The record reflect that we have 4 members of the council present with 1 absent so far. Hopefully, Councilmember Rodriguez will join us very soon. Madam Clerk, will you ask the council members about whether or not they can hear or see well?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Stallard, can you hear me well?
Quite well, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Barajas, can you hear me well?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Councilmember Fernandez, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Thank you. And I still don't see Councilmember Rodriguez.
Okay, very well. Madam Clerk, have you posted the agenda for tonight's meeting at a location that is reasonably accessible to the members of the public?
Yes, I have.
Thank you. At this time, I would ask the other city officials who are present for this hearing to state their identity and their positions.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, this is Ken Hyatt, Interim City Manager, present.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. This is Kara Uwada, City Attorney.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. This is Ana Gonzalez, City Clerk.
Thank you.
Mayor, I'd like to also acknowledge some of the other staff that are present on the call. We have Police Chief Derek Caff, Fire Chief Eric Zane, Community Services Director Christine Engel, Public Works Director Craig Locke, Acting Community Development Director Brent Meyer, Finance Officer Kim McKinney, and also Senior Management Analyst Lynn Johnson available on the call for questions that the council desires.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Now, as we go through our agenda tonight, I would request that before speaking, please identify yourself. For example, this is Mayor Pro Tem Stallard. Before you speak, please allow the individual to speak and please do not interrupt. I will also ask to the greatest extent possible that you mute your phones so that we don't get unnecessary background noise. I would now like to advise all city council members, the city clerk, that any votes taken during this teleconference portion of the meeting must be taken by roll call. I would ask that Madam Clerk take that roll call for any and all votes. Now we'll begin with our agenda, starting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, please.
Thank you. Let's cross our heart and pledge to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stallard. I'm now going to move to item D on the agenda, which is public comment. And Madam Clerk, as the council chambers are closed to the public, is there any member of the public who has submitted an email or left you a voicemail, the general public comment portion of our meeting?
Yes, I do have 2 emails that were submitted.
Please.
Thank you. To Woodland City Council, I am writing to you to address my concerns over the current COVID-19 coronavirus situation that has businesses and activities across the city, the county, the state, and the country shut down, and we are fast approaching 2 months worth of this. How long do our elected leaders think we can continue this, economically speaking? While many seem to think the pandemic is still posing a clear and present danger, there is mounting medical and scientific evidence that this virus is not as deadly in terms of population percentage as once thought, that it attacks most seriously those who are elderly and have compromised immune systems, that it does not easily transmit in open areas, but in confined spaces, and that we have effectively flattened the curve. Now many are in fear of a second wave of the disease and want to clamp down even harder or even longer. I hope that you know and appreciate that this is not sustainable. I know of many small businesses in Woodland that are struggling. One I am aware of is a single mother of 3 who runs a barber shop as a sole proprietor. She has not been able to get any of the federal relief money that has been distributed, nor to qualify for unemployment insurance benefits. The only thing that has been a saving grace for her is that her landlord has forgone her rent. There is also the belief on the part of some doctors and scientists that the forced quarantine of the general population will result in the lack of herd immunity and will leave us open to renewed surges of the disease. I think it is reasonable for policies to be considered in the following areas. 1, return of children to school, possibly with some social distancing measures maintained, but children have been shown to be the lowest risk population group. 2, allowing businesses to open based on taking measures to maintain social distancing where needed, such as for restaurants, to avoid unnecessary contact between patrons by use of appointments for establishments such as barbershops, beauty salons, and the like, or other such measures as deemed appropriate. 3, opening of outdoor parks, sports facilities, beaches, etc., maintaining social distancing measures as appropriate. 4, delegation to religious organizations to conducting services at their discretion with all measures such as closure, social distancing, wearing of masks, or other PPE left to the organizations themselves and to their congregations. Parentheses, U.S. Constitution, First Amendment, close parentheses. Concern has often been expressed that we not make the cure worse than the disease. If we are not fast approaching that point, we have already passed it. I implore you, as my elected representatives at the level, to carefully and seriously consider all these points and to take whatever actions may be taken to relieve the burden under which people in our community are suffering, and which in large measure is a product of orders being enforced to shelter in place. which orders some legal experts argue cannot stand constitutional muster because of their infringement on citizens' constitutional rights. Please acknowledge and respond to this situation in ways that are consistent with your oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. Dale J. Dennis, resident of Woodland, Yolo County. And then I have one more. Subject is West Main Street bike lane width 5 foot wide as designed or widened to 6 feet. Mayor and council members, thankfully, the West Main Street construction will soon be completed. Since design approval, I have had multiple conversations with city staff regarding the unsafe 5 foot wide bike lane design, which is 1 foot narrower than the city's 6 foot wide design standard. Caltrans standards include the 2 foot concrete gutter as part of the bike lane width, but anyone who rides a bike would never ride in the gutter. Along West Main Street, the curb and gutter was not reconstructed, and in many locations, it's broken, uneven, and has a cross slope in the excess of 10%. Since a 2 foot gutter is not bike riding surface, this leaves a 3 foot wide asphalt riding zone for bikes. This narrow width is dangerous and not acceptable. Reference the attached picture of the existing 5 foot wide bike lane on the south side of Gibson Road at the drive-through Mexican restaurant west on the railroad. Does this look safe? I have submitted an alternate design to staff that marginally reduces the width of one west and eastbound lane by 6 inches and the center turn lane by 12 inches. This frees up 2 feet, which can be used to widen the bike lanes from 5 to 6 feet. Staff has rejected this proposal. The title page of the construction document states this is the West Main Street Bike and Pedestrian Mobility and Safety Improvement Project. The truth is a 5 foot bike lane on West Main Street is a death trap for cyclists because 1, 3 foot asphalt riding, which provides no safety factor for bikes and does not feel safe next to moving traffic. 2, many vehicles, like trucks, cannot maintain the California law of 3 feet clearance to a bike. As a test of public sentiment, I prepared a hand-drawn sketch of the current approved 5 foot bike lane and an alternate design with a 6 foot wide bike lane that meets city design standards. With a minimum effort, a petition for 6 foot wide bike lanes found 17 individuals that agree a 5 foot bike lane is too narrow and dangerous. My alternate sketch shows suggested changes to widths of 2 travel lanes and the center turn lane. There may be other lane width options, but the key change to the West Main Street design to make it a real bike safety improvement project is to widen the bike lanes from 5 feet to 6 feet. As previously stated, staff has rejected bicycle safety primarily in favor of a 12 foot median instead of 11 foot. I see no reason why 11 foot median and a 6 inch lane width reduction will not work. For comparison, the north leg of the Main Street West Street intersection has 7 foot bike lanes, a 9.5 foot width left turn lane, and a 10 foot to 15 foot width north and southbound lanes. While not ideal, the vehicle lanes seem to function without issue, even with YOLO bus, and the bike lanes feel safe and are safe. Isn't bike safety what the West Main Street project is all about? Isn't that how the funding was obtained? Then let's follow through and make it safe for cyclists and widen the bike lanes to 6 feet before it's too late. Thanks for listening. Respectfully, Bruce Jacks, Woodland, California.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Are there any other messages that you need to?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's going to take us to item E, council and staff statements. I'm going to start with Council Member Fernandez.
Thank you, Mayor Landsberg. I've got nothing significant to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, have we heard from Council Member Rodriguez?
I do not see her, no.
And we'll ask Councilman Barajas for his comments.
Yeah, I don't have anything significant to report. Thank you.
Councilmember Barajas. Mayor Pro Tem Tom Steller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few things. The League of California Cities arranged for Zoom calls with both Assemblywoman Aguilar Curry and Senator Dodd. I was able to participate in both of them. I described our fiscal situation as we learned about at our last council meeting. I also beseeched both of them to get something going at the state level to deal with the unfunded pension liability problems that cities everywhere are facing. And Bill Dodd promised that he would have a conversation with Governor Newsom on that subject. I was happy about that. The Woodland Chamber of Commerce has been holding regular meetings with members of the business community to see how the COVID pandemic is affecting them. Yesterday, we heard from 3 of our local tire dealers. Fortunately, with this group of people, business people, there have been no layoffs. There have been, however, reduced hours, and there is some reduction in sales, but those businesses are still surviving. Then the final thing I want to mention is that there were 2 SACOG meetings on Monday. One I'll report on was the Policy and Innovation Committee, which produced a discussion that I thought was very interesting. I have a graphic to share with you if it can be brought up. One of the suggestions at this particular meeting is that we should not go back completely to the way things were after this current situation resolves. There have been some benefits, as we've learned, in terms of reduced commuting and air quality. And the suggestion is that perhaps we can find ways to also continue to reduce commuting through employer incentives and other incentives to help people telecommute more often, not necessarily always, but maybe 1 or 2 days a week. The graphic shows that the daily vehicle miles traveled in millions of miles is 60 million miles a day before the current situation. As you see the dates progress along the lower axis, by April 3rd, we had reduced daily trip miles from 60 vehicle miles traveled per day to basically less than 20 million vehicle miles traveled per day. We all know how much cleaner the air is and reduce congestion on our roadways. Now, we don't want to stay at this situation forever, but we do think it's interesting for us to think about lessons we can learn from this situation and maybe benefit us in the future. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stallard. My comment will be simple tonight. I just want to thank all the people of Woodland for being very tolerant of these imposed conditions as we slowly work our way past this horrible disease. I want you to know that myself and all members of the council, all members of the city staff are mindful of the difficulties that you face day to day. However, I do want to agree with the governor that we probably are not going to go back to what we thought was normal until we get some immunity, until we get to a vaccine. We'll get there if we continue to work together. It's coming. Be patient. I just ask the community, all of our members of the community, to hang in there, and it will get better soon. That's my comment for tonight. Mr. Hyatt.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, do have a few brief remarks. I'm going to focus them on updates around COVID here in Woodlands. First report, our county dashboard today now indicates 172 confirmed cases throughout the county, of which 86 are identified with residents here in Woodlands. Positive news, though, in those numbers, continue to see no positive cases among staff, and especially amongst our first responders. So continue to be pleased to see those results, and certainly a testament to the diligence that they're taking to protect themselves as well as the public. Also want to report that as of today, the state has established a testing center, one of 80 that are going to be set throughout the state of California. So as of today, here in Woodland, we have a testing center available for COVID-19. Those appointments can be made online or by phone. They are not drop-in appointments and will be available Tuesday through Saturday from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. The testing center will be here hosted in Woodland for Yolo County from May 5th through the 30th, at which point it will transition to West Sacramento and be reopened from June 2nd through June 20th for now. The testing center is open to anybody in the community. Again, by appointment only, and more information is available on the county website, as well as the press release that we sent out today. Lastly, certainly many are watching what the governor's going to be doing later this week, sort of following on to his announcement on Tuesday, where he indicated that the state will begin to move to stage 2 of modifying the stay-at-home order. What this means is with his announcement Thursday, we anticipate some additional manufacturing and logistics businesses, as well as retail. Potentially some additional recreational activities will be permitted under the state order. That will allow then the county health officer to take that guidance and apply it here in Yolo County. So we are watching very closely to see what is included in that, but fully anticipate that it will include small retail, non-essential retail businesses to be allowed to operate at a minimum using curbside pickup, but potentially even reopening their doors. Of course, with guidance specifically around how to protect the public that attend these new businesses with new social distance guidelines and CDC guidance on how to protect against the spread of the virus. That is conclusion of the report I have this evening, Mr. Mayor. I do have a few highlights in the long-range calendar to share as well. So the next City Council meeting on the 19th will consist largely of a budget recommendation, sort of a follow-on from the workshop we had at the last meeting. And of course, tonight's conversation around measures E, F, and J. But on the 19th, the budget team will be presenting to the council the 2020-2021 budget recommendations, which will include balancing measures necessary to achieve a balanced budget for next year, but also include potential tier reductions should they be necessary as we learn more about the impacts of the fiscal implications around COVID. In addition, we do have our annual intent to levy for landscaping and lighting assessment districts, of which we have 6 here in Woodland. So that will be May 19th. We will continue to have budget discussions through June 2nd and followed on by the 16th of June, where we'll ultimately have a final budget for the council to adopt. Also want to highlight and again point out that on the 2nd of June, we anticipate to bring forward to the council the homeless shelter bid award and operating agreement, including construction of the new homeless shelter at Beamer 102. Those plans have now been put out for bid to local contractors, and anticipate getting those bids back by the end of the month and presenting a recommendation to the council on the 2nd to get that project out of the ground. So I will conclude my review of the long range as well, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Before I proceed, somebody's shuffling papers. If you can be careful, it's coming out pretty loud to the rest of us. Careful with your paper shuffling. Thank you. We're now going to move to item F, minutes of our meetings of April 7, April 14, and April 21. Any member of the council have any request to amend any of those minutes? If not, is there a member who will move to adopt the minutes of those 3 days?
Allard moves.
Barajas seconds.
The move is by Mayor Pro Tem Stallard, seconded by Councilman Barajas. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. I will now take a roll call vote. Barajas,
Yes.
Councilmember Fernandez,
Yes.
Mayor Landsberg,
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez. I don't think she's here yet. And Mayor Pro Tem Stallard.
Yes.
Thank you. Item carries on a 4-0 roll call vote.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Now
Thank
going to
you.
move to the consent calendar, item G, items G3 through G11. Is there a member of the council who wishes to pull or discuss an item from the consent calendar, items G3 through G11? Hearing none, is there a member of the council who wishes to move the consent calendar?
Stallard moves.
Barajas seconds.
The motion is by Mayor Pro Tem Stallard, seconded by Councilmember Barajas. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. Roll call vote, Councilmember Barajas,
Yes.
Councilmember Fernandez,
Yes.
Mayor Landsberg,
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez still not here, and Mayor Pro Tem Stallard.
Yes.
Thank you. The consent calendar carries on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you,
Roll-
Madam Clerk. We're now going to move to, on the calendar, items H on the report to city manager, and that's going to be H12 to start with. Mr. City Manager, please.
Yes, good evening, Mayor, members of the council. So we have 4 budget-related items for you this evening. The first on the agenda is the annual approval of the Measure J spending plan. So this is part of an annual process which outlines the proposed expenditures for Measure J for the upcoming fiscal year, but also reports on expenditures to date. Finance Officer Kim McKinney will be walking you through the specifics of the recommendation this year and will be used to inform our final budget preparation. But as you recall, the Measure J sales tax measure, quarter-cent measure, is estimated to generate over $20 million during the 8-year life of the sales tax measure. The annual report outlines those expenditures that have been made to date, but also moving forward through the balance to ensure that it achieves the measures K, L, M, and N that were companion to the Measure J sales tax measure. Those measures specifically outlined percentages of the revenues to be spent in 4 different categories for team programming, library, crime prevention, as well as for utility ratepayer assistance. And so the report will outline the expenditures of this past year and proposed expenditures for next year. And I see Kim McKinney is available and she'll walk you through the specific plans for next year.
Hi, good evening, Council. I've shared on the screen here what was included in the staff report that went out for the Measure J annual report, and Ken covered a lot of the information included in there. What's shown here in the forecast for the remainder of Measure J is consistent with how we've been spending Measure J over the last several years. We're expecting for next fiscal year 2021, to have just under $2.8 million in revenue, and that is a decreased amount of revenue compared to what we have seen in previous years and what we were originally forecasting, and again may be subject to further changes as we learn more, as the total economic impacts become more available to us as a result of the COVID-19 emergency. So included on here outlined the utility assistance program. We continue to fund that at $250,000 a year. That program runs on a fiscal year basis. So beginning July 1, we'll have application, or residents will be able to apply for the program for next fiscal year. The next several items, general recreation, middle school, aquatics, really all these programs in here are under the recreation category for the advisory measure that was included, that went along with Measure J. And the level of funding will continue to be the same there. The same programs will be continued to carry out as long as they're permitted to. Included in those recreation categories are more than 4 full-time positions. And just a break from the report here to say that included as an attachment to your report, included in the staff report, was a summary of the annual report from Measure J that was presented to council in December, and that includes a lot of information about participation in the various activities that are paid for by Measure J. So if you're wondering about how many folks are benefiting from or participating in these various programs, I would encourage you to look at that attachment. The next categories down here, the At Potential Youth, Crime Prevention, and GREAT program were all covered under the same advisory measure that discussed At Potential Youth and Crime Prevention. We continue to fund out of this category a school resource officer, a crime prevention specialist. The GREAT programs for 4th and 7th grade are included in those categories, as well as funding for YGRIP and Big Brothers Big Sisters and those programs. And we are continuing the funding level as we have in previous years forward for the remainder of the 2 years, full years that are left in Measure J. And the library line item here was the library had its own advisory measure as well. The $600,000 in there includes funding for most of the library's material purchases. It helps fund the ongoing operations of Square One, as well as other temporary staffing that allowed the library to expand their hours of operation to more than what they had prior to the implementation of Measure J. So all of those programs together at the same level as that we've funded before would cost $2.6 million next year. We are proposing a couple of additions to Measure J. The graffiti program that the city operates that abates graffiti on publicly owned property throughout the city currently is paid for in the general fund. As we've mentioned before, and as we'll be returning to discuss with you, the general fund has significant out of balance budget situation for next year. And one of the potential programs that was proposed for review and potentially elimination was the graffiti program, which costs just under $50,000 a year. Staff's proposing to reclassify that graffiti program to Measure J for the next 2 years because we think it does go well with the crime prevention and intervention activities paid for under the crime prevention advisory measure. We also are including a small amount of additional temporary hours for the library that will help expand another evening of service at the Square One workspace. And finally, some one-time allocation of money to the library to help pay for some shelving improvements on the main floor, expansion and improving the literacy area, as well as improvements in the teen area. So that's $150,000 of one-time money for Measure J included there. So if everything that was proposed here does show a minor $54,000 more in expenditures than revenues, but that's primarily as a result of the $150,000 one-time money. We do continue to show a fund balance for Measure J. We're at the end of the current fiscal year expecting a $700,000 fund balance, and that's after we've already set aside money for the Southeast Area Pool Project, as well as a contribution towards the Phase 2 Sports Park. So we do anticipate having almost more than $650,000 in reserves specifically for Measure J at the end of next fiscal year. And again, that depends on how the revenue situation works out for Measure J. We are forecasting or showing the remainder of the life of J here. As a reminder, J expires in September of 2022. And so we show 1 quarter of revenue in there, but haven't included any programming. And as we have more information and get closer to the actual expiration of Measure J, we will continue to discuss how to potentially program that last quarter, but we're just showing everything showing up in fund balance for now. So that shows what we're anticipating in Measure J, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Is there any member of the council that wishes to propose a question to Ms. McKinney or the city manager regarding Measure J?
Mr. Mayor, this is Vice Mayor Stallard.
Stallard?
I just hope through this presentation our community realizes how much Measure J has done for the community. Many youth-related services, the library services have been severely depleted in the Great Recession. And so Measure J, which the voters approved by 65%, has made it possible for us to provide a great deal of additional and important services. This money is really important to us, and I'm grateful to hear the report tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member? Thank you, Ms. McKinney. Mr. City Manager, any further comment on the item H12?
No additional points to make other than, again, spending plan that you have before you this evening will then be folded into parts of our general fund budget moving forward. There are components significantly that are from Measure J that actually get folded into our final budget in June. So appreciate the hard work by Kim and her staff putting this report together annually, and of course all the staff that execute the plans under the Measure J spending plan. So we appreciate the opportunity to report, and certainly if you have any questions after tonight's presentation, don't hesitate to follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt. No further comments. Is there a member of the council who wishes to approve the updated Measure J spending plan?
I'll move to approve.
Motion by Councilmember Barajas. For a second.
Stallard seconds.
Stallard seconds. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. I'll take a roll call vote. Councilmember Barajas,
Yes.
Councilmember Fernandez,
Yes.
Mayor Landsberg,
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez, still not on, and Mayor Pro Tem Stallard.
Yes.
Madam Clerk, this is Councilmember Rodriguez.
Oh, you are? Okay, I'm sorry.
It's okay, thank you. Yes. on
Okay,
the vote. Thank you.
thank you. And Mayor Pro Tem Stallard?
Yes.
Thank you. Item 12 carries on a 5-0 roll call vote.
Madam Clerk, will you make a notation for the record that Councilmember Rodriguez has joined us?
Yes.
Thank you. That's going to take us to item H13, Measure E. Mr. Hyatt?
Yes, so Measure E spending plan, similar to Measure J, is another general tax that was passed by the voters here in Woodlands. It's a sales tax measure. In this case, it is a half-cent sales tax measure. It was originally approved in 2006. It was a 12-year lifespan, which expired in 2018. And the item immediately after this one is the follow-on measure that took its place, called Measure F, with a similar term and a similar half-cent supplemental sales tax that was approved. So the report before you this evening on Measure E really is nearing the completion of the expenditures that were or the revenues that were generated from the Measure E sales tax, which are still being expended due to the project's life that they were associated with. And then the Measure F sales tax spending plan really then takes its place and will continue all the way through till 2030. So I will have Kim walk you through the Measure E plan. And Kim, if you feel appropriate, given the way that the two sales tax measures interact, feel free to carry into Measure F as well. And then we can turn it over to the council for questions on both of those.
Mr. Hyde, before she does that, can we fold both votes into the same vote?
I think, Kara, correct me if I'm wrong, if the council desires, they can have a motion entertain approval of both items H13 as well as H14 at the same time, yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, I put up on the screen here the Measure E spending plan. And as Ken mentioned, we have stopped receiving sales tax revenues from Measure E, but there are still some projects that continue to be in construction. We haven't started construction yet, but will. And we also are receiving some revenues back into Measure E for money that was loaned out from the fund or advanced from Measure E to pay for projects that, in this case, the Kentucky project money was advanced here because we didn't have road development money available to do that. And so as development money comes in, we'll be reimbursing Measure E and then allocating it from that plan. So there's just a couple of projects left in here. In the transportation category, we have $2 million of road projects, the largest of which is $1.2 million for the East Main Street Improvement Project, which has been included for a couple of years in the CIP, but the largest allocation being next fiscal year, as well as some additional money to supplement the West Woodland Safe Routes to School project, which is on the Court Street in Woodland. We'll be covering a little bit more of the transportation projects in the CIP council agenda item a little bit later. Another project included on here, we are allocating an additional $520,000 to the sports park turf replacement project. Measure E previously had allocated $2.45 million to this project. There's been additional work happening with the sports park turf replacement. The overall project cost is expected to be about $3.6 million. So we're looking for additional funding. This $520,000 included in Measure E here was from money that was originally allocated through the spending plan to be used to supplement debt service for the sports park and community center debt service that we pay. And to the extent that we have enough development activity and revenues generated, Measure E didn't need to loan all the money. This was left over from fiscal year 1920 money that was not needed for debt service and was available for park projects. So we've prioritized the sports park turf replacement as the park project to receive the balance of that money. So that's $520,000, and you'll see this turf replacement project show up again in Measure F in a moment to finalize the funding for that project. So that's really all the major projects that continue to be paid for out of the Measure E fund. I just wanted to remind council that, as I just mentioned, Measure E assisted with payment of debt service for most of the life of the Measure E spending plan term. Measure E continues to carry a $9.8 million total advance to the Park Development Fund because of that debt service. We will continue to include that in the spending plan, and it's also recorded in our financial statements as a loan. You'll see this show up again in Measure F in just a minute, but that, as park development fee becomes available when the debt has been paid off, then Measure E will begin receiving loan repayments similar to the one I discussed earlier for the road fund. So we don't have any to record yet, but we do continue to show the $9.8 million loan in Measure E. So unless anybody has a question about Measure E, I'll just move on to the Measure F spending plan.
Your question for Ms. McKinney on E? Apparently not, Ms. McKinney. Go ahead.
Okay, Measure F, as Ken mentioned, replaced Measure E and we began collecting money in fiscal year 18-19 in October of 2018. The advisory measure that went with advisory language that went along with Measure F was different than what was included with Measure E before, and it contemplated allocating Measure F money into primarily 4 categories. As I just finished talking about, we are continuing to anticipate the need to supplement debt service payments until the life of the debt is paid off, which is in fiscal year 25-26. So we're getting closer. We still have a few more years to go on those bonds. We anticipate a fairly minimal amount of development activity, and to the extent that development occurs more than we originally anticipated, then we wouldn't use the entire amount to supplement the debt service, but instead have that money available to be used for other park-related projects throughout the city. The current fiscal year 19-20 that we're in, we are not anticipating needing to use all of that. We had allocated about $1.1 million we are expecting, we've already collected enough revenue in the park development fee this year to know that we won't need all of that money. But the sports park turf replacement project does need additional funding. So next year we're allocating $330,000 that we did not need or won't need for debt service assistance this fiscal year to help supplement that project next year to get to the full $3.6 million needed to pay for that project. Under the roads category, there's this is also a continuation from Measure E, our in-house road program support. The transportation funds that we receive as a combination of gas tax funding and LTF and STA funding that we receive from SACOG can be a volatile funding source. It has been, in the case of gas tax, declining over time. And the first priority of that money is the Yolo County Transportation District. And so our available funding to pay that helps fund our street crews and ongoing road construction activities does not meet the needs that we have. So we anticipate supplementing it to the tune of $750,000 a year from Measure F, potentially increasing up to $1 million later, depending on how revenues work out. And then $1.7 million we have included in here towards a pavement maintenance project included in the CIP for a total allocation to roads of $2.5 million, which was what we anticipated in the original spending plan as well. Under the public safety staffing area here, there are 2 positions paid for the fire department and 3 sworn positions and a couple of temporary staff positions included in police staffing there, or just over $1.1 million allocated in the public safety category. We also allocate $250,000 to economic development, which funds primarily 1 full-time position and some administrative assistance and minor amounts of programming, but the general fund provides some supplemental money for ongoing economic development activity. So the total expenditures for next year, we're anticipating $5.5 million to be paid out of the $5.6 million in revenues we're expecting to receive. Staff is anticipating including some balancing measures from the general fund over to Measure F. We're to help balance the general fund, anticipating or recommending moving 1 police officer out of the that's currently paid out of the general fund over to Measure F to be paid by this sales tax measure, along with the other 3 positions that are here. That would save just over $200,000 in the general fund and be included in the forecast moving forward here. And we're also including some one-time grant match funds for some fire equipment that needs to be purchased. So it does result in a net, negative $139,000 next year, mostly, well, in part because of the one-time money for the sports park turf replacement project rolling over to next year. So Measure F, just like Measures J and the general fund, our revenues are again subject to changes in the economy. We don't know everything that's going to be happening there, and we will continue to revisit that on the regular basis. And we are accumulating a fund balance in Measure F, which has its own fund separate from the general fund, so it's not included in there either, of just over $1.1 million at the end of next year. And that does include, that's after setting aside $500,000 for the sports park phase 2 project in the future. So that covers the Measure F spending plan. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney. Any member of the council have a question for him regarding Measure F?
Yes, I do, Councilmember Barajas.
Go ahead, Mr. Councilmember Barajas.
Yes, I've noticed that on the budget regarding Measure F for roads, the budget has, let me see here, has decreased. Now, isn't there more needs in road repairs and roads in Woodland than there was the years before? Because it seems like our roads always need to either have maintenance or need to be reconstructed all over again. I'm seeing here that's that it looks like it's less and less of a priority when it's on our spending plan.
So the allocation to road construction projects remains fairly consistent through the spending plan. There's a larger number in fiscal year 1920, and that's mostly because of carryover from 1819 that wasn't spent and was reallocated in 1920. So the funding level for roads remains fairly consistent. There is an increase in the amount that would need to be supplemented or potentially need to supplement our in-house road program because of declining revenues. You're right, we do have a lot of needs throughout the city in transportation. There is another funding source that we expect to use and are planning to use for road projects, road construction projects, and that's the SB1, the additional gas tax money. That's in a separate fund. It does not show up in the Measure F spending plan, but does show up and would be included in the capital improvement program.
Okay. And when it comes to traffic safety, calming traffic streets, does that money come out of the Measure F spending plan?
So far, any money that we've allocated towards traffic calming program or projects has been allocated from the general fund and has not been included in the Measure F spending plan. We have fairly generic other road projects moving forward. We have anticipated or allocated a couple of identified projects, road projects for the next couple of years. And after that, we just allocate it to other and can, relook at our priorities as information comes in. But we revisit this every year. But so far, the general fund is what has been providing that funding.
Okay, thank you.
Any other member of the council have a question or comment?
Yes,
Kim?
comment, question, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Hi, Kim. Thank you for that report. I'm checking in on the turf replacement for the sports park. So you said we have 2.45 million already allocated, and with the 330,000 for Measure F, that's going to put us at just under 2.8 million, I believe, leaving us with about 820,000 short. Is that correct?
So what you said is correct. At Measure E, though, we originally had 2.45 million. This, in the updated spending plan, we added $520,000 of Measure E money to that. So that increases Measure E's allocation. And there's also $300,000 that has been set aside from the general fund over the last probably 7 years that we set aside about $50,000 a year from the general fund towards sports park turf replacement, and that's $300,000 that will be contributed to the project as well. So that'll make up the math differential that you asked about.
Okay, so that covers the full.
That gets you to the 3.6, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that clarification. And real quick on the Project Reserve Sports Park, is that pertaining to future projects? The 500,000, or is that for the turf?
No, that's for, that supplements money that was set aside in Measure J for phase 2 or future phases of sports park. So it adds to the $1 million that was in Measure J set aside and $500,000 here. So we have $1.5 million set aside.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I have a question when you have a moment.
Okay.
On public safety, both fire and police, the numbers looking at 2021 and going a couple years ahead of that are significantly increased. Is the number of staff the same in those numbers? Or do you include the ones from down below where you intend to add a police officer position into the Measure F spending plan?
So under the public safety category in the middle of the spending plan, the number of staff included there stays the same, and they just cost more every year. So that includes increases in anticipated salary increases, retirement costs, anything that's related to a position. It costs more over time, just like it does in the general fund. So that's the same number of positions.
Okay, so you didn't take the bottom number, take it back up.
No,
Okay,
the number stays down there, yeah.
Okay, I get it. Thank you. Any other member of the council?
Yeah, I got a question, Mayor Landsberg.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, this is in regards to Measure J spending plan. I just kind of overlooked this question, but it's in regards to the crime prevention line item. What type of services are under the crime prevention line item? Because I see here that it's at 126,000, almost $120,000 for this baseline year coming up, but this past budgeted year it was at 134,000. So there's a reduction there, and we have a lot of gang-related shootings around Woodland. So, can you give us a description around the crime prevention line item? Type of
Yes.
that
So the crime prevention line item primarily funds the crime prevention specialist position in the police department. The gang-related activity that you talked about would be under the at potential youth line item included in the spending plan and not the crime prevention. And the reason it goes down, I mean, we had a staffing change there, and we also often carry over unspent money from one year to the next. So we probably, I think, had some carryovers from fiscal year 18-19 into the 19-20 number, which will make it look like the allocation goes down. So we didn't take any money away from that line item, and it still continues to fund a position and some minor supplies and services related to that program.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. So it's okay to move both these at the same time. Item 13 and 14.
Move to approve, Barajas.
Second, Councilmember Rodriguez.
Motion by Councilmember Barajas, seconded by Councilmember Rodriguez. Madam Clerk, regarding both of those items.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'll take a vote for item 13 and 14. Councilmember Barajas,
Yes.
Councilmember Fernandez,
Yes.
Mayor Landsberg,
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez,
Yes.
and Mayor Pro Tem Stallard. Mayor Pro Tem Stallard. Mayor Pro Tem Stallard. Have we lost you?
We've lost the council member.
I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry, I bounced out for a moment and I vote aye.
Thank you. So I have for item 13 and 14 on a roll call vote 5-0 for both.
Thank you. That takes us to item H15, Capital Improvement Program. Mr. Hyatt.
Yes, this is the final item on tonight's agenda, and it's just a presentation for the council this evening. We will bring back the final proposed capital improvement budget in June. I want to give the council a preview before presenting that to them. As you recall, the capital improvement program is a 4-year spending plan effectively for our major capital and physical improvements that the city conducts. The plan that you have presented to you this evening is a $70 million expenditure plan over that 4-year period, and touches on a variety of different project and infrastructure areas throughout the city, and is funded by a variety of different funding sources. So I'll have Kim again walk you through the capital plan for this next 4-year period. And again, we'll bring back to you the final presentation, but welcome your comments and feedback on the proposed capital program this evening, that we can then take those comments into the final proposed budget. So Kim, do you want to walk council through the capital improvement program?
Sure. Our capital improvement program includes a lot of different projects, and we didn't attach all of them to the staff report, and we won't go all over them here, but they do cover a variety of areas and infrastructure types throughout the city. Included up here just a chart that shows by category, or how we categorize the programs and projects that we have in the city over this term of the CIP. We really look to really appropriate just 1 year of the CIP. The remainder is a plan, because these are long-term projects in nature. So you want to make sure we have identified funding available to us prior to starting a project. So fiscal year 2021 is the year we're looking at next year that we would be asking for appropriations. And you can see it's just over $30 million in projects. We do have a variety of funding sources that pay for these projects. Out of that $30 million, just over $9 million is paid for by our water and sewer funds and is included in those 8 studies that have already been approved. $7.6 million is coming from various grant funds, primarily related to transportation projects in the CIP. $4 million is coming from SLIF, which is the Spring Lake Infrastructure Fee, and that's money that's dedicated for and collected from Spring Lake developers. And another $4.5 million included in there is coming from measures E and F, which we just went over. You can see a large component of our CIP is in the transportation category, $17 million of transportation-related projects, largest category there, followed by just over $6 million of water projects. That kind of is the water and sewer make up the majority of the funding through the program, as well, again, as transportation, which is primarily what we already covered in the Measures E and F spending plan. I'm just going to highlight on here a couple of new projects or significant changes to projects that may not have been included in a CIP before. I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. The very first one on there is $4.5 million for one project, which is paid for by water and sewer funds, which would be replacing water mains and pipelines, as well as sewer lines that are over 100 years old in the Pendergaston College area of town, where they've been experiencing significant difficulties with breaks due to old and unsafe material. So they'll be replacing that at a cost of $4.5 million. And again, these are projects that were already anticipated to be paid for by water and sewer rates that are already adopted. The groundwater monitoring wells are wells that would be needed to help us track water quality and movement related to or to supplement the ASR wells that we recently installed. And I'll just highlight on the bottom there, we included a LEAP grant, which is $300,000. That it's a grant to help us complete the 6th cycle of the housing element update that needs to be completed by middle of May next year. So that's a new project that is included in the CIP this year. And then just some significant project changes down here below. Only $50,000 we've included in here related to Fire Station 3 relocation. That's really just to help with some minor staff-related costs for just continuing the project planning. We have not yet identified significant funding that would be available in the short term to inform the time frame for the fire station relocation project. The Sports Park Drive pedestrian overcrossing, $4.2 million is added to that project in this CIP, and the majority of that $3.6 million is coming from various funding that was agreed upon in development agreements. So that was added to that project to include a path on 113 and the Sports Park Drive and Farmer Central Road. Gibson area road interchange is $1.75 million. That's a SLIF, a Spring Lake paid for project and required by the Spring Lake CIP, which is new or updated in the CIP. Then towards the bottom here, the West Gibson Road Rehab Project, $4.9 million is added to the CIP for that. It's a large portion of that's coming from $3.2 million in grant funding we received from SACOG to supplement the Measures E and F money that we have available for that project. And SB1 is helping there as well. And then another large utility project, $5.4 million for replacing and upgrading materials and old water and sewer mains in the downtown Marshall and College, and also on Gum Avenue. And then a very large project at the bottom here, which is not programmed until fiscal year 22, so we won't be asking for appropriations, but do want to highlight on here almost $7.5 million road rehab and maintenance project for, it would cover construction on Matmore from East Main to Gibson and on Gum from East Street to Matmore Road. And that's paid for by a combination of SB1, gas tax money, and measures E and F. So it just kind of highlights some of the bigger projects. Many of the projects that are included or will continue to be included in the CIP you've seen come before council before, either through measures E and F spending plan or through various other staff provided updates. We have limited funding sources available to us to help projects, which is why we do have limited projects. You know, we have struggled with having available funding from our development impact fees over many years due to, in large part to debt that was issued a long time ago that we were still working on paying off from development activity as well as advancing projects prior to having the money. So we've been very careful about how we spend development impact fee money and have very little programmed in the CIP outside of ongoing debt service. We've made significant use of grants, and staff has been very successful in identifying and applying for and receiving grant funding, particularly in the area of transportation related projects, which has significantly helped to supplement measures E and F money that we have available to us to do road projects. And just finally, there's a large number of water and sewer projects that we continue to include in the CIP and will for a number of years as we continue to replace and maintain and upgrade aging infrastructure throughout the city, again, for projects that were already planned for and included in the rates that we already have adopted. So when we come back to have the council adopt the proposed budget in June, we will include the entire CIP with that budget document at that point in time. It's really just as a quick highlight, a reminder of the types of projects we included and our major funding sources for the large projects that you'll see in the CIP. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Kim. Any member of the council have a question or comment for Kim regarding the CIP and projects presentation? I have a question and comment when you're ready, Kim.
Okay.
When you come back with these things, and you've mentioned that so many of these projects have a funding source, you know, constituents want to know where this money comes from. If you could, when you bring this back and you talk about, for example, Project 21-01, you give us the funding source, how we got there, where it comes from, so that our voters and our constituents understand the source of the money to do these projects. They see it as $70 million, they're going to freak out.
Yeah.
I would. And so perhaps it would be helpful for our constituents to see where the funding source is coming from and also the significance of the project. For example, a lot of folks may not know we have 100-year-old pipes in the city that are bursting on Pendergast. Just a few months ago, a terrible blow up there, and the whole thing needs to be replaced. So when you break these things down for us, perhaps a little more information about how they're funded, so on and so forth.
Absolutely. And when we do have the preliminary budget document, there's a fairly extensive section dedicated to capital improvement projects that includes funding sources, detailed descriptions of the projects, and most of the information that you just asked about. So we'd be happy to make sure that that's highlighted in the future.
Yeah, I just want to make sure the public gets that information so they feel comfortable as to the projects, their importance, and how they're getting paid for. Okay. Any other member of the council have a comment or question for Kim or city manager? Hearing none. This is just a presentation, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for the presentation. Another well thought out presentation. Appreciate it. A lot of effort goes into these things. That brings us to the end of our calendar. As we adjourn tonight, let's keep in mind the individuals who work at St. John's in Stolwood, not only work there, but have family members who live in the community, and also the folks who actually are patients of the facility. Let's think about those folks and the stress that many of those families are feeling tonight. Let's adjourn in the memory of those that we've lost from Stolwood. Have a good evening.
Rich,
Yeah.
could we also remind our viewers that Thursday is Big Day of Giving, and our nonprofits in Woodland and throughout our region are depending on the generosity of people to help these nonprofits meet their obligations, which are only increasing in this difficult time. Thank you for letting me mention that.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.